Therapy Chat Podcast, episode 149.
This is the Therapy Chat Podcast with Laura Reagan, LCSW-C. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Laura Reagan, LCSW-C.
Hey everybody, it's Laura Reagan, wanting to let you know that if you are interested in doing a deep dive into the Daring Way work, which is based on the research of Brené Brown on authenticity, vulnerability, courage, trust, and connection and relationships, you can join Charlotte Heiler-Easley and I in Lexington, Kentucky on October 5th and 6th for a 2-day retreat intensive combining the Daring Way with Charlotte's work, relational equine assisted learning. Yes, you heard that right. We are doing a 2-day retreat combining the Daring Way with working on trust and connection, boundaries, vulnerability, and authenticity through work with horses. It's an unbeatable combination. We had an amazing experience last November 2017 when we did 2 one-day retreats, and we wanted to expand to offer 2 days because we can go deeper in 2 days, and everybody loved the 1 day so much. So join us in Lexington, Kentucky, October 5th and 6th. Best pricing ends on August 1st, but we still have discounted rates available after that as well. And to register and get all the details, go to laurareaganlcswc.com/retreat. If you want to understand more about why we are doing these retreats and what you can expect to gain from them, listen to episodes 55, 56, 123, 133, and 139. I talked with Charlotte twice in episodes 56, 133, and which was a replay, and 139. And I talked with Julia Alexander, who is another therapist using work with equines in trauma-focused therapy in 123. And in episode 55, I talked about my own experience the first time I connected with myself in deep connection with a horse and how it was really a powerful experience that changed everything for me. It's been 2 years. It's still just as memorable and just as poignant for me. And I want to share that experience with you. So if you want to join us, you can go to laurareaganlcswc.com/retreat, get all the information. There's a payment plan, and I hope we'll see you there. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. Today, I am bringing you another replay episode. This is my interview with Pat Ogden, who is the founder of Sensorimotor Psychotherapy. We had a fascinating conversation about how bottom-up processing is a different way of working with people who've experienced trauma. And at the time when I talked with Pat, I was hoping to begin level 2 of sensorimotor psychotherapy training. And at this point, in August of 2018, I'm about to head into my 5th of 10 weekends of the level 2 training, and it's been absolutely incredible. Level 1 was amazing, but level 2 is everything I hoped it would be and much, 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 much more. As an experienced trauma therapist and someone who's worked with hundreds of people who have experienced trauma, I have never found myself so challenged to really understand more deeply how to work with developmental trauma using the body. It's just really all new frontiers for me, and it's incredible. It really works nicely with my interview with Deirdre Fay, which will be replayed, I believe, next week. So you can go back and listen to that or just wait until it's replayed next week. I'm still on hiatus for a few more weeks, hoping to have wonderful content ready for you when I return. Already, I've recorded several great episodes and more are coming. So I guess the hiatus isn't really a hiatus because I'm still working. That is the life of a part-time podcaster, I guess, and a full-time business owner. But I do it because I love it, and I'm grateful that you listen. I hope you found something interesting, something new or helpful in listening to Therapy Chat. And I always love to hear from you. So feel free to get in touch anytime through the SpeakPipe app on my website, therapychatpodcast.com. For now, sit back and enjoy my interview with Pat Ogden. Therapy Chat Podcast wouldn't exist without the support of its listeners. If you'd like to become a member, please go to patreon.com/therapychat. By making a $1 per month donation, you can help Therapy Chat keep going over the long haul. Thank you for your support. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. My guest today is the author of the books Sensorimotor Psychotherapy and Trauma in the Body, and the founder of Sensorimotor Psychotherapy. I'm so honored to welcome Dr. Pat Ogden. Pat, thank you so much for being on Therapy Chat today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
So can you please start off just by telling our audience a bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. Well, I started out working in the 1970s, the early 70s, as a psychiatric hospital, teaching yoga and dance. And it piqued my curiosity about how the body could be helpful in healing. So that was kind of a beginning for me. And what I noticed then was that the patients who did those classes seemed to get better faster. And now, in thinking about it, I think about how calming the yoga classes were. And as we know, that stimulates the dorsal vagal parasympathetic branch, which calms everything down, but without the fear that's stimulated with trauma. And the dance classes were very energizing. So it stimulated their sympathetic systems without the fear. So it really seems to relate in retrospect to the polyvagal theory. All I noticed then was that the patients seemed to get better. And then in the early 70s, I met Ron Kurtz, who was the first person that I met who directly incorporated the body into psychotherapy. And he became my best friend and my most influential mentor. We worked together until his death in 2011. So I came to Boulder, Colorado with Ron. I studied all kinds of movement therapies and body therapies, including Rolfing and postural integration, continuum movement, Rolfing movement, just among a few of the strong influences. And that helped me develop more awareness and insight as to how the body is involved in psychological health, in both healing trauma and attachment, and how the body is affected with both those injuries. So that's my early history. I mean, earlier than that, I was a dancer all my life. My mother put me in dance class at age 7, and that had actually a profound influence because you were taught about carriage and poise and how to live in your body in a more integrated manner. So I think that had a strong implicit effect on me. Should I go on?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, how did you come to develop sensorimotor psychotherapy through all of those diverse experiences?
My main interest was really how movement and posture and body sensation could be direct targets of intervention. And that was from even the 70s. I mean, I think that's part of why I was so interested in teaching yoga and dance in the psychiatric hospital. And although I had a lot of teachers, Ron Kurtz being the main one, but many others as well, Emily Conrad, Peter Milkier, Emmett Hutchins, who were my Rolfing teachers, much later in the 90s, Bessel van der Kolk, Alan Shore, Anno van der Hart, Steve Porges, later in this century, Philip Bromberg, Kathy Steele in the 1990s, Ruth Lanius. These were all people who are now on our advisory board who really contributed to my understanding and synthesizing what I had developed kind of in an alternative world, synthesizing that with more traditional standards of care. But it was my patients that taught me the most. In the 1970s, I was asked to be a referral therapist for Wardenburg Clinic, which is the clinic here at the University of Colorado. And I was referred the young women who were having difficulty with their sexuality in terms of experiencing sexual pleasure. And we didn't know anything about trauma, it seems, back in the 70s. Nobody was talking about trauma. So I was working with them in the same way that I worked with my other clients, working with strong emotions and childhood memories. And they started not getting better, and some got worse. And I was just baffled. And I felt terrible for my clients. And I remember thinking, I'm just going to try to help them stay in their bodies. So that was the beginning of my learning about trauma. I realized that all of them had been sexually abused. All of them were out of what we would call now out of their window of tolerance. They were dysregulated. So that was my client group that taught me about stabilization. That stabilization was the first order of business with traumatized clients, and that some ability to regulate and stabilize arousal had to be in effect before processing traumatic memories. So that was a big learning for me. Much later, in the 1990s, I learned about Pierre Genet, who in 1898 devised phase-oriented treatment, of which the first phase is stabilization. But I didn't know anything about him in the 70s.
He was way ahead of his time.
Yeah, he was way ahead of his time. And I think that I learned mostly by doing, like the Rilke poem where he says, I know by going where I have to go. And I made a lot of mistakes, but sincerely tried to help my clients and tried to adjust the training that I had, which was all informal, to my clients, because I basically learned through apprenticing with Ron and studying alternative approaches and a lot of movement and body therapy approaches until I did formal study in psychology and finished my PhD in 2003.
To make it official.
To make it official and to give me the credibility that I thought I needed to do what I wanted in the world in terms of really contributing to healing trauma and attachment wounds.
Yes, it seems that it's still so novel, and to many people, they're really unaware of how healing trauma and even more so attachment is such a right brain process, and how, talking isn't it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe how sensorimotor psychotherapy is different from traditional therapy?
From the beginning, what I learned from Ron would be what we call right brain to right brain connection or regulation. He didn't call it that, of course, back in the 70s. He talked about befriending the unconscious. And he taught me that that's the first order of business. You have got to befriend the client's unconscious, which now we think of as the right brain implicit self. So he had interventions that I think we've elaborated on in sensorimotor psychotherapy to work with that, like always collaborating with the client, naming what you see in a collaborative way rather than in any kind of authoritative way, and in our work paying very much attention to that body-to-body communication, the movement patterns not only of your client but of you, and how that dance goes. Like if you lean forward, Does your client lean back? Does your client lean forward too? If you make a statement like, oh, you seem sad, or it looks like your breathing has gotten constricted, and you track your client's reaction. So there's a lot of emphasis in our work on that implicit communication, where we're tracking moment by moment how our client responds. And if we're not matched, like if we track their eyes shift, or a puzzled expression, or a tightening in their body that indicates kind of a mismatch, we learn to correct it immediately. So I think that right brain to right brain was really emphasized in my alternative training, even in the 70s, which perhaps wasn't emphasized in formal training to be a psychologist or a counselor. With sensorimotor psychotherapy, we're definitely interested in how the movement and posture and gesture and sensation of the body contributes to psychological distress and injuries. So that's always been my focus from the very beginning. In fact, I was much more interested in movement and posture than Ron ever was. And that's why I developed sensorimotor psychotherapy, which has a lot more to do with movement and posture, and using the body not only as an access route to psychological wounds, but also as a vehicle for transformation. And this comes, I think, a lot from my dance training and my Rolfing training, because Rolfing, for the listener, it's a hands-on body work that works with the fascial layers of the body to loosen up the adherences, the adhesions, and all, so that the body can actually find its alignment and gravity. So posture improves, energy can flow more freely through the body. And that happens also with therapy, as people start shifting the way their bodies reflects and sustains attachment wounds and traumatic injury. Their bodies start to find more balance, more peace with gravity, more alignment. And I love that part of the work. It just fascinates me. And I feel like with standard training and to become a therapist, people aren't taught that. And it's a too bad, because I think most therapists are missing out on a very valuable way to help their clients.
Yeah. And really important information that their clients are bringing and giving them through what their bodies are doing in the session, that the therapist, if they don't have that training, they're missing so much information.
Mm-hmm. And so many opportunities to support healing.
Yes, I had worked with people who have complex trauma for over 10 years before I did the level 1 sensorimotor training. And I was pretty good at noticing when someone was dissociating or when they were out of their window of tolerance, even though I didn't know what that was before the training, but the window of tolerance, that is. But when I attended level 1, I started noticing my clients' dissociation much sooner than I had noticed it before. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And helping them be able to notice it and feel it when it was happening helped them be more in their bodies and get back into their window of tolerance using their bodies. So if you don't even see that it's happening, then you can't help them get back online. Right.
And I think that most of those signs will show up through the body, through a shift in the physiology, or a little shift in movement or expression. And in sensorimotor psychotherapy, we do attempt to track those physical phenomena that speak about the implicit self, and they speak before our left brain has found the words. So I think what you're describing is really about listening to those implicit phenomena through your ability to track physiology and posture, movement, gesture, expression, even color changes in the skin.
Yes, very much so. And it's much slower, and it's much more attuned.
Mm-hmm. I think that attunement is to the implicit elements, what Ron would call the unconscious. And I think when you ask what's different from talk therapy, if you're dependent upon the words, you have to really wait until those words are available to the client to describe what's going on. And you can ask questions to try to stimulate that description. But the client can only describe what they're aware of. And the nature of implicit phenomena is that we're not able to describe it because we can't be aware of it. It's like what Chris Bruin calls situational memory. It's triggered by reminders of the past. It's not verbally accessible. And so what you're talking about in terms of dissociation are recognizing what's not verbally accessible so that you can help your clients before they get too dysregulated or too out of their window of tolerance. You can help them come back into the window because you recognize the indicators of what's going on implicitly.
Yeah. And I think what you just said about implicit memory, I think you said, and being able to verbally access it, I think that's the thing with attachment, is that so much attachment trauma is really not accessible to the client in verbal memory or verbal, they can't access how to verbally express what the feeling is.
Right. Well, I think that's true for attachment in general because our attachment patterns are so strongly influenced during the first few years of life. And that is the right brain implicit self, as Alan Shore says. And that implicit self is dominant for human behavior. So even if we're working with non-traumatic relational wounds, injuries that all of us have, because none of us had parents or caregivers that were perfect. So even if we're not traumatized, we have an attachment imprints that aren't necessarily accessible with words. And we can try to find the words, but even the infant researchers, they talk about, Beatrice Beebe says that the meaning that a baby makes is evident in their movement sequences. And those movement sequences are a trajectory for the future, for future relationships, even though they can be changed, of course, with further experience. Ed Tronick, another infant researcher, he says the same things. He says you can see the meaning that the infant is making through their posture, their movement, their expression, all before the acquisition of language. And in talk therapy, I don't think it's as precise. I don't think the verbal narrative is as precise as the somatic narrative, the narrative of the body. I think the narrative of the body speaks more clearly to those implicit phenomena than the verbal narrative.
So can you talk about how sensorimotor, you talked about the fact that the body can be an entry point to accessing the emotion, but how does sensorimotor psychotherapy help people process trauma and emotion using the body?
In terms of trauma, we recognize now, everybody's writing about this, that trauma, first and foremost, impacts the physiology and the body. So we will respond to a threat physiologically and somatically before we even feel the fear or think about it. Like if you're falling down the steps, you grab for the rail. The information doesn't even go to the cortex. It's instinctual to grab the railing, to try to save yourself from a fall. And it's those instinctive phenomena that contribute to the dysregulation and PTSD, because trauma will stimulate high arousal that's designed to fuel active defensive responses like fight, flight, and cry for help. And if those active responses aren't effective, our arousal will plummet to a hypoarousal or dorsal vagal state that is appropriate for a feigned death or a shutdown state. And all animals have those defenses. And so there are two categories. One is the active ones, the fight, flight, and cry for help. And then there are two immobilizing ones. Those first three are mobilizing. They're active. If those don't work, the immobilizing ones emerge, like the shutdown that's powered by the dorsal vagal system, and also the freeze response, which is not very well understood in our field, because freeze is like a shock response where your body tenses, but all movement is arrested, but your sympathetic arousal is very high. So those are all instincts. Those are innate animal defenses that all mammals have that impact our bodies. There are certain actions that go with each of those animal defenses: fight, flight, cry for help, freeze, and shutdown. And our physiology becomes profoundly dysregulated, which is appropriate for if you're facing a threat to your life or your safety. But it's not appropriate for daily life. And the problem with trauma survivors is that hasn't been integrated. So their arousal gets really dysregulated, and they get triggered by reminders of the trauma into that state. They live in what Anno van der Hart calls trauma time. But living in trauma time is primarily a physiological and somatic state. Sure, there's fear and terror and rage associated with it, but that's not the root of it. And as Janae said, trying to process those emotions for trauma it's not going to work, because they're designed to fuel the defenses that live in the body. So in sensorimotor psychotherapy, we really work with a bottom-up approach for trauma to stabilize arousal and to gain more flexibility within the defensive responses, because most traumatized clients will develop patterns of animal defense based on what has worked in the past. So, for example, with a client who had childhood trauma who had to shut down because she couldn't get away, she couldn't flee, there was nobody to help. So the next line of defense was to just shut down and go numb and into that profound hyper-aroused state. Well, she's lost in that scenario over time. She's probably lost the impulse to actively defend. But as Janae said, that impulse still is there in the body. He called them acts of triumph. So we work to stimulate those active, mobilizing defenses through the body with things like finding out how the body would want to defend. Like, does it want to push away? Does it want to strike out? Does your body want to run? Do you want to scream for help? And then we integrate it by using mindfulness, so it's not a dissociated experience. And that's very important, because we know that our cortex isn't online with trauma. We're not thinking. We're just reacting, which is a great way to survive. But those reactions, those responses that persist, can't be integrated if we just enact them. So that's where mindfulness comes in, because mindfulness will keep the frontal lobes online. So we can work with mindfully finding a way that from the client's body that they would want to push away or strike back, and mindfully executing that action, which is integrative in the brain and also reinstates those active defenses that were given up at the time of the trauma because they weren't effective. Often they would have made the trauma worse. So people always execute the best defense possible for the situation, but in that process, they'll lose the flexibility among the animal defenses. So we work with integrating those animal defenses. We work with physical somatic resources that help to stabilize arousal, like grounding, centering, breath, alignment, containment, a wide array of somatic resources that really help to stabilize. So that's how we work with trauma. Now, that's different from working with strong emotion. This was part of the problem in the 70s when I worked with these sexual abuse survivors, because I had learned how to work with strong emotion. But strong emotion, expressing the terror, the fear of what had happened to them, didn't help at all, because the root of their troubles was in their physiology and their body, not in the emotion. Mm. If we're working with someone who has a wide enough window of tolerance that they can express strong emotion without dissociating, then we do that. Then it's different. Then the body can be used to find those emotions and those memories. There's research that shows if we, for example, take on a certain posture, and I think it's the same with movement, the memories, the events that occurred when that posture was operational in our history start to emerge. So if a client is talking about they don't get any support in their life, for example, and their wife is never supportive, and their friends aren't supportive, and their body reflects that by tightening in the shoulders. In sensorimotor psychotherapy, if we want to access the emotion of that, we could say, it seems like your shoulders are tightening. Do you want to explore that? Maybe you can tune into that tightening, maybe just exaggerate them a little bit. And as they do that, the memories very often, or at least the emotions, start to emerge of when that posture was learned. And usually in this case, it would be like a reaction to not having support early on, and the emotional pain that goes with that. So we want to deepen into the wound in this case, so that the emotions can be felt and resolved and expressed within the context of an attachment-focused therapy and an attuned relationship. And it's interesting because both those scenarios require working at the edge of the window of tolerance. If you stay in the middle, you're not going to really get change. And if you go too far over the edge, whatever happens can't be integrated, which is what happened to my poor clients in the 70s before I started to realize what was going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I want to understand I feel I know the answer to this, but I want to hear from you whether you think that trauma can actually be resolved. Trauma that's held in the body can be resolved through using sensorimotor psychotherapy.
Well, first of all, I don't think any method is the answer for all clients. I think that every method has value. There's no one answer for anybody. Mm-hmm. I think that clients find sensorimotor psychotherapy very useful. People who are doing training are constantly writing and saying, change my practice, my clients are getting better. So yes, I think it can be useful. Absolutely. I mean, it's my work, so I believe in it strongly. But that's not to say that there aren't a lot of other variables, like the therapist's resonance with this work, with the body. The therapist has to find a way to get the client to want to work somatically, or you can't do it.
Right.
You have to be able to psychoed or whatever. And that's a big challenge with trauma, especially because traumatized clients are usually terrified of their bodies because the body's been a battleground for them, And so there are a lot of factors. Of course, I believe sensorimotor psychotherapy is extremely effective. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't. But I don't think it's the only effective method.
Oh, yeah.
There are other methods that are also extremely useful. I think a trauma therapist should try to get all the tools they can, and because it's not easy dealing with complex trauma.
Oh, I agree. And I guess what I was wondering is I think I went into the training thinking that people's trauma can heal but not be resolved. And when I finished the training, I felt and I feel that, and there may be other ways to do this, that using sensorimotor psychotherapy, that the trauma can actually be moved out. Like the trauma that's held in the body can be processed and released to where it's not held in the body. Even though, people can have so many traumatic experiences, it's not like, every one is resolved when you just begin doing trauma therapy. But that's what I'm asking, is if you think it can be resolved or if trauma is something that just always will be there and can't be healed.
Well, we're talking about the effects of trauma.
Yes.
We can never change what happened, but we're always working with the effects, the leftovers, the responses that are geared for a past situation, not to the present. And what I think is that, well, first we'd have to define resolution. I think that trauma can be resolved, quote unquote, to the point that people who've suffered trauma can lead an extremely rich, fulfilling, intimate life. Yes. I feel that in all the clients I've worked with, that has happened for the majority of my clients. However, that said, triggers still occur. Like when 9/11 happened, I had clients that I hadn't seen for years who got triggered again, for example, by what had happened in 9/11 for different reasons. People often find unresolved elements inside when they near old age and illness. So, I guess what I'm saying is that as a human being, I don't think my work or anybody's growth is ever done. I think there's always steps and more evolution that can happen. So there's no end point. If I think past trauma can be resolved to the point where most clients can go on to live healthy, wonderful lives, yes. It's a process. Healing's a process that, to me, it's not like an end point. I'm still growing. I'm still working on myself, and I still find corners that still need attention. And I think that's part of the wonder of being alive is that we're always changing and growing because we are living systems.
Yeah, lifelong process of growing and learning.
Yeah. But I think an important element, really important element of sensorimotor psychotherapy that was very different from any of my formal training is that we believe strongly that the client does have within them what's needed to heal. And they do, in their bodies and their psyches. It's all there. And we just want to help create a context where that natural healing potential can come forward. So that's really critical that I want your listeners to understand, because I never feel like I have the answer. I feel like what I can do is help the client find those answers inside. Like Ron used to say, we have to help the client find enough of the right kind of information from within so that they spontaneously reorganize towards health. And that's a huge philosophical tenet of this work. That we have a responsibility to our clients to help them find that healing potential. That's our main responsibility, I feel, as a therapist.
Yes, that's beautiful. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about sensorimotor psychotherapy is that I think it helps people access their own body's ability to heal, so that the way I see it, one could be working with a sensorimotor psychotherapy therapist and, together do a lot of healing work. And then the client has resources that they've gained through that work.
Right.
Well, that maybe were already there, but they learned how to tap into that they can continue to use, over their lifetimes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's true. I feel like the clients they find that empowerment from within. It's not something that was done to them or that they don't understand. It's not some gimmicky thing.
Right.
They know how to re-access it. And when I was first becoming a therapist in the 70s, I was really into the Tao and the Tao Te Ching. And there's a quote from there that always I thought was relevant to therapists. And it was, when the sage works, the people think they did it themselves because they're empowered. They feel the power within themselves to affect their own healing. Not that by any means consider myself a sage, but I do want my clients to feel and to know that they got there themselves. It wasn't because of any magical thing that I did or any gimmicky thing or anything. They got there themselves. And therefore, that's what you're saying. Therefore, they can continue to grow and change. And I think in sensorimotor psychotherapy, clients do develop an affinity for their body and a belief in the wisdom of their own body, which is great.
Yes, being able to return to trusting their bodies again.
Yeah.
Well, Pat, I know we have to finish up. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. And where can people find your work? And I know I can give them the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy website. Do you have a separate website?
No, I don't. They can go to the website. They can, if they Google Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, they'll find the Institute and papers and lots of resources, I think. But the Institute is the best source of information, and it will list all the publications and the books and everything if you're interested in reading more. And it will also tell where our trainings are, because we teach all over the world. If people want to find a training, or if they want to find a therapist. If some of your listeners think, well, maybe I'd want to do this kind of therapy, they can go to the referral page on our website.
That's wonderful. Thank you for this great work that you're doing in the world. And thank you for being on Therapy Chat.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for asking me.
Just another reminder that if you'd like to become a member of Therapy Chat, supporting the podcast while receiving fun member perks and being able to communicate with me one-on-one, go to patreon.com/therapychat. If every subscriber donated just $1 per month, Therapy Chat would be able to keep going strong indefinitely. Thanks so much for your support.
Thank you for listening to Therapy Chat with your host, Laura Reagan, LCSW-C. For more information, please visit therapychatpodcast.com.